In the long arc of the Vietnam War, few units gained reputations as distinct or as respected as the American Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, and the Australian Special Air Service Regiment. Both operated in the same theatre, both specialized in reconnaissance, and both worked in environments where silence, patience, and precision determined survival. Yet the two forces were shaped by entirely different national doctrines, combat histories, and operational demands. Understanding why these two units stood apart requires beginning not in a single patrol, but in the broader landscape of the war they shared. Vietnam in the late 1960s was a mosaic of terrain types and enemy strategies. Dense triple-canopy jungle, narrow ridgelines, monsoon-flooded lowlands, and the hidden networks of the Ho Chi Minh Trail demanded specialized reconnaissance forces capable of reaching where conventional infantry could not. The North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong did not rely on massed formations alone. They moved through corridors hidden beneath foliage, transferred supplies at night, and operated inside a labyrinth of bunker systems and concealed trails. Any force tasked with tracking these movements had to operate beyond standard infantry capability. This environment led two allied nations to deploy reconnaissance specialists who, while sharing the same jungle, approached the mission through fundamentally different philosophies. MACV SOG was formed to answer a strategic American requirement: intelligence deep inside denied areas. Its teams crossed illegally into Laos, Cambodia, and the North Vietnamese border zones to locate supply hubs, track infiltration routes, plant wiretaps, conduct prisoner snatches, and direct airstrikes against the Ho Chi Minh Trail. These teams depended on rapid insertion, rapid collection, and rapid extraction. They worked in small, mixed groups of Americans and indigenous operators, carried advanced radios, and expected heavy contact as a routine possibility. Their missions were aggressive by design, built around speed, mobility, and the ability to call for overwhelming air support if compromised. SOG operated under pressure from both intelligence demands and political constraints, making its work high risk and high impact. The Australian SAS entered Vietnam with a different mandate. Rather than crossing borders or directing strategic bombing campaigns, they were assigned to the 1st Australian Task Force to operate inside Phuoc Tuy province. Their objective was not deep interdiction, but dominance over a defined area. They specialized in long-range reconnaissance patrols, counter-infiltration, and stealth ambushes against Viet Cong movement within their designated zone. Their patrols were smaller, their missions shorter in range but longer in patience, and their doctrine emphasized minimal noise, minimal trace, and absolute discipline in movement. Where SOG pushed outward into hostile sanctuaries, the SAS worked inward to suffocate enemy mobility inside an Australian-controlled province. Although their areas of operation rarely overlapped, the two forces did cross paths. Occasionally, SOG personnel rotated through bases where Australian forces were present. At other times, Australian patrol leaders attended briefings alongside American advisors during joint planning at Nui Dat or Vung Tau. These encounters were not full joint missions, but exchanges of technique, equipment, and reconnaissance philosophy. They were moments in which two elite forces operating in the same war observed just how far apart their doctrines had evolved, and yet both units were responding to the same enemy. Both faced adversaries who relied on concealment, deception, and terrain mastery. Both were tasked with gathering information that shaped the wider operational picture, and both operated under the knowledge that detection, even for a moment, could cost an entire team their lives. Their shared battlefield demanded excellence. Their nation's strategies shaped how that excellence took form. In this environment, MACV SOG and the Australian SAS emerged as two of the most respected reconnaissance units in Vietnam. Not because they were the same, but because they mastered opposite forms of the same art. One relied on technological advantage, aggressive mobility, and overwhelming response capability. The other relied on restraint, patience, and the near-total removal of its own footprint from the environment. Two approaches, two philosophies, one unforgiving jungle. This was the stage on which their reputations were forged. MACV SOG was built to confront a strategic reality the United States could not address through conventional military means. North Vietnam's supply lifeline, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, did not run through South Vietnam alone. It extended across the borders of Laos and Cambodia, protected by political sanctuary and shielded by some of the most complex jungle terrain in Southeast Asia. The North Vietnamese army moved men and supplies along this network with remarkable efficiency, using a system of concealed paths, underground caches, and camouflaged way stations. If the United States wanted to disrupt this flow, it needed a force capable of penetrating these denied areas, often without the benefit of conventional support. MACV SOG became that force. Selection for SOG differed from typical Special Forces recruitment. Operators were drawn from Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, Recon Marines, and other specialized units, then screened again through interviews, psychological evaluation, and a blunt assessment of their willingness to operate far beyond standard rules of engagement. The missions were covert, often unattributed, and carried risks that exceeded those faced by most U.S. units in Vietnam. SOG teams carried no identifying patches, were instructed to deny capture at all costs, and operated under the constant threat of encirclement by numerically superior forces. Team composition reflected this complexity. A standard reconnaissance element, known as a spike team, usually consisted of 6 to 12 men, 2 or 3 Americans, and a larger contingent of indigenous troops, primarily Montagnards, Nungs, or Vietnamese team members who brought local terrain knowledge and tracking experience. Each team had designated roles. The 1-0 served as team leader, the 1-1 as assistant, and the 1-2 as radio operator. Indigenous fighters acted as point men, flank security, trackers, and scouts. The structure was hierarchical but fluid, designed for rapid adaptation once inside enemy territory. The equipment loadouts were heavy by necessity. Every team carried a PRC-25 or PRC-77 radio as their lifeline. These radios weighed between 20 and 25 pounds with batteries and required disciplined transmission procedures to avoid detection. Teams also carried KR-15 carbines, M79 grenade launchers, fragmentation grenades, claymore mines, smoke markers, signal panels, emergency beacons, map pouches, morphine, and demolition charges. Ammunition loads commonly reached 300 rounds per man. Weight mattered less than survivability, and survivability depended on preparedness. SOG doctrine emphasized speed and aggression, especially during unexpected contact. The typical pattern involved insertion by helicopter, rapid movement to an objective area, quiet observation, and equally rapid extraction before enemy forces could close in. But the enemy often reacted quickly. North Vietnamese hunter-killer teams were experienced at tracking SOG patrols, and the moment a team was detected, the priority shifted to breaking contact fast enough to request air support. Heavy reliance on close air support from gunships, A-1 Sky Raiders, and fast movers was not just a tactical preference. It was built into the mission framework itself. For SOG, communications discipline was critical. Teams transmitted short encoded bursts every 30 minutes to confirm their status. These bursts reassured forward air controllers and command posts that the team was intact and moving according to plan. If a burst was missed, headquarters assumed potential compromise. Extraction procedures could be initiated within minutes, supported by pre-planned air routes and helicopter packages trained specifically for SOG operations. This system made SOG one of the most tightly integrated ground-air reconnaissance forces of the war. Their training reflected this emphasis on mobility and survival. SOG teams mastered immediate action drills, understanding that detection could transform a silent patrol into a running firefight within seconds. They trained for rapid exfiltration, using Maguire rigs, Stabo rigs, and in extreme cases, the Fulton surface-to-air recovery system. The expectation was simple. If compromised, teams would fight their way to an extraction point, hold it long enough for air assets to arrive, and rely on superior firepower to break enemy pursuit. Across hundreds of missions, SOG produced some of the most valuable intelligence of the war. They mapped newly built segments of the trail, identified supply caches, monitored troop movements, located anti-aircraft positions, and placed sensors used for strategic bombing operations. Their reconnaissance informed major air campaigns, including Commando Hunt and the interdiction efforts that followed. But these gains came with a significant cost. SOG recorded some of the highest casualty rates of any American unit in Vietnam, a reflection of how dangerous their deep penetration missions were. In the broader structure of Allied forces in Vietnam, MACV SOG represented the edge of American reconnaissance capability, an organization built to penetrate deep, gather information quickly, and escape under fire if necessary. Their strength lay in technological integration, aggressive mobility, and the ability to leverage American air power with precision. Their challenges, heavy gear, constant movement, and the inevitability of enemy detection were directly tied to the nature of their missions and the strategic goals they were asked to achieve. They were not designed to vanish for days without a trace. They were designed to reach far, gather fast, and survive long enough for extraction. And in that role, they became one of the most effective reconnaissance forces of the war. The Australian Special Air Service Regiment entered Vietnam with a mission fundamentally different from their American counterparts, and their doctrine reflected decades of experience in long-range patrolling from Malaya and Borneo. Operating primarily out of Nui Dat in Phuoc Tuy Province, the SAS were tasked with controlling a defined area of operations through reconnaissance, counter-infiltration, and small, deliberate ambushes. Their goal was not deep penetration behind international borders, but the creation of a surveillance net that denied the Viet Cong freedom of movement inside the province. Their patrols were deliberately small, 4 to 6 men, selected for endurance, discipline, and the ability to remain motionless for long periods. Unlike SOG's heavily equipped teams, the SAS carried minimal gear, light rifles, suppressed weapons, limited ammunition, and stripped-down rucksacks averaging 35 to 45 pounds. This reduction was not about speed, but about silence. Everything that produced noise, canteen lids, loose straps, metallic parts, was removed or secured. Even their movement relied on deliberate pacing, advancing only when wind, rain, or natural jungle sounds masked their footsteps. Communications followed the same logic. SAS patrols operated under strict radio silence, often transmitting only at scheduled times or in emergencies. Their training emphasized map memory, terrain reading, and the ability to navigate without frequent reference to equipment. Camouflage and counter-tracking were treated as core skills. Patrol members learned to walk on roots instead of soil to avoid breaking foliage and to erase any trace of their presence before leaving an observation site. Their operational results reflected this discipline. Over 5 years, SAS patrols conducted more than 1,000 missions, locating enemy camps, supply points, and movement corridors with minimal compromise. Their ability to remain unseen for days at a time earned them a reputation, among allies and enemies alike, as some of the most silent operators in the Vietnam War. The differences between MACV SOG and the Australian SAS did not come from capability, training quality, or professionalism. They came from doctrine, two separate answers to the same strategic problem. These differences shaped how each unit moved, communicated, and survived in the jungle. For SOG, the mission dictated a reliance on technology. Operating across national borders and deep inside enemy sanctuaries meant teams needed dependable, long-range communications, rapid extraction plans, and the ability to call air support within minutes. Radios, signal equipment, claymore mines, and extensive ammunition loads were not optional. They were mandatory for survival. This resulted in heavier packs, more frequent halts, and predictable communication routines such as scheduled burst transmissions. Speed, aggression, and the assurance of overwhelming firepower formed the backbone of American deep penetration reconnaissance doctrine. The Australian SAS approached the same environment from the opposite direction. Their primary threat was not long-range encirclement, but close-range detection by small Viet Cong units familiar with every feature of Phu Oc Tuy province. Their doctrine emphasized reducing exposure rather than preparing for extraction. The less they carried, the less noise they made. The less they transmitted, the harder they were to triangulate. Rather than planning for exfiltration under fire, they focused on preventing contact entirely. Every patrol movement was calibrated toward invisibility, slow pace, minimal disturbance of the environment, and strict avoidance of trails or predictable routes. Both systems were effective, but each required its own mindset. SOG teams moved quickly and hit hard when found. SAS patrols moved slowly and ensured they were never found at all. The contrast illustrates how operational demands, not raw skill, created two distinct and highly specialized forms of jungle reconnaissance. Although MACV SOG and the Australian SAS operated under different national commands and in different regions of Vietnam, their paths did cross through a series of briefings, familiarization exchanges, and shared reconnaissance discussions. These encounters were not joint combat patrols, but rather professional interactions that allowed each force to observe the other's methods and compare operational doctrine. At Nui Dat, Vung Tau, and occasionally Da Nang, Australian patrol commanders participated in intelligence coordination meetings that included American advisors and reconnaissance specialists. These sessions focused on infiltration routes, enemy movement patterns, and new techniques for countering Viet Cong and North Vietnamese concealment. SOG representatives, when present, brought insights from cross-border operations, sensor placement, and reactions to large-scale enemy logistics systems. The Australians contributed detailed knowledge of close-range tracking, vegetation reading, and fieldcraft honed from earlier campaigns in Malaya and Borneo. On training grounds, informal demonstrations further highlighted doctrinal differences. SOG personnel often displayed American demolition methods, helicopter insertion techniques, and emergency extraction procedures. Australians, in turn, showed how they conducted silent movement, reduce their signatures, and set observation posts almost undetectable even at close distance. Their camouflage routines, including the use of natural vegetation, mud, and controlled stillness, frequently surprised U.S. troops who were accustomed to heavier equipment and faster movement. These exchanges built mutual respect. Americans noted the Australians' ability to operate for long periods with minimal resupply, leaving almost no trace of their passage. Australians observed the scale and intensity of SOG air integration, recognizing how Americans combined ground reconnaissance with rapid, overwhelming support. Though their missions rarely intersected, the two forces learned from one another, each recognizing the other as masters of a different branch of the reconnaissance discipline. The operational histories of MACV SOG and the Australian SAS revealed two distinct patterns of success shaped by their environments and mission profiles. SOG's work revolved around deep interdiction along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Between 1966 and 1972, its reconnaissance teams executed hundreds of cross-border missions under programs like Shining Brass, Prairie Fire, and Phu Dung. These operations involved tracking NVA truck columns, locating anti-aircraft sites, and identifying supply caches hidden beneath dense canopy. SOG teams often triggered major air operations. A single visual confirmation of a logistics hub could prompt days of bombardment by tactical aircraft and B-52 strikes. The intelligence gathered directly influenced the large-scale interdiction campaigns known as Commando Hunt, which targeted North Vietnam's logistical arteries throughout the conflict. The Australian SAS, by contrast, focused on controlling movement within Phuoc Tuy province. Their reconnaissance patrols routinely located Viet Cong camps, staging areas, and transit corridors leading toward Australian outposts. When the SAS found an opportunity, they set deliberate ambushes designed to eliminate small enemy groups with minimal noise and exposure. Well-documented operations near the Long Tan battleground, in the Nui Din Hills, and throughout the Hatdish area resulted in significant disruption of Viet Cong supply routes and command networks. Their ability to locate enemy units without detection allowed Australian infantry and armoured elements to carry out follow-up sweeps with greater precision and reduced risk. The contrast between these case studies highlights the divergent environments the two forces faced. SOG confronted large, organized NVA elements operating along a vast, transnational logistics system. The SAS confronted smaller, agile Viet Cong groups that relied on local knowledge and short-range movement. Each force achieved success by mastering the specific challenges of its operational domain. Despite limited direct interaction, the impressions MACV SOG and Australian SAS operators formed of one another were marked by professional respect. Declassified reports, advisor notes, and post-war veteran accounts consistently highlight how each force recognized the strengths of the other, even when their methods differed sharply. American personnel who observed the Australians frequently commented on their extraordinary fieldcraft. Reports noted their ability to construct concealed observation posts that were undetectable even at close range, their disciplined noise control, and their skill in reading tracks and vegetation disturbances. U.S. advisors described the Australian patrols as exceptionally quiet and capable of operating within meters of enemy movement without compromise. Their restraint, waiting days to collect intelligence before striking, was viewed as a deliberate and highly skilled approach tailored to counterinsurgency. Australian assessments of SOG were equally respectful. They regarded SOG operators as aggressive, capable, and technologically integrated in a way few other units in Vietnam could match. The Australians noted SOG's ability to coordinate with air assets under pressure, their rapid extraction procedures, and their resilience when cut off deep inside enemy territory. They saw SOG's reliance on radios, sensors, and air support not as a weakness, but as an adaptation to the high-intensity threat environment along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where NVA main force units operated in battalion-sized concentrations. What emerged from these impressions was not a hierarchy of skill, but a recognition of specialization. Each force was optimized for its mission. SOG, for deep interdiction against a large, disciplined enemy network, and the SAS for stealth-dominant reconnaissance against smaller, highly mobile insurgent elements. Their mutual respect reflected an understanding that mastery in one environment did not translate directly to mastery in another. The legacy of MACV SOG and the Australian SAS in Vietnam extends far beyond the patrol zones where they once operated. Their contrasting doctrines, one built around rapid penetration and technological integration, the other centered on silence and fieldcraft, shaped the evolution of modern special operations in ways that remain visible today. MACV SOG's influence is most apparent in the development of U.S. special mission units after the war. Its communications procedures, helicopter insertion techniques, extraction systems, and intelligence-driven targeting laid the foundation for organizations such as Delta Force and later Joint Special Operations Command. The integration of real-time reconnaissance with air power, refined under SOG's high-risk cross-border missions, became a defining feature of American special operations in subsequent conflicts. Lessons learned from SOG's deep interdiction missions also informed later doctrine on unconventional warfare, sensors, and strategic reconnaissance. The Australian SAS carried forward its Vietnam-era expertise into future operations across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Its disciplined small-team structure, camouflage practices, and long-range reconnaissance methods became hallmarks of modern Australian special operations. The regiment's emphasis on silent movement, counter-tracking, and precise ambush execution influenced training programs not only in Australia but also among Allied units that sought to replicate its effectiveness in jungle and close-country environments. The principle that the best patrol is the one never detected remains central to SAS doctrine today. Together, the two units demonstrated that excellence in reconnaissance was not uniform but adaptable. Their methods diverged because their missions demanded it. One force optimized for aggressive penetration against a structured enemy network, the other for stealth dominance against dispersed insurgent elements. Both achieved mastery in their domains and set standards that future generations of special operators would study, refine, and adopt. Their legacies endure not through a single style of warfare, but through the understanding that in complex terrain, success can be achieved through many forms of mastery.